We'll call to order the Subcommittee on Readiness for the House Armed Services Committee. Today's hearing is on alignment of infrastructure investment and risk and defense strategic requirements. This is the first hearing of the 114th Congress. I'd like to welcome back our returning members, especially the gentlewoman from Guam, Ms. Madeline Bordallo. Thank you so much. As our ranking member, she's done a fantastic job, and I look forward to another Congress where we can continue to work together and get great things done to solve the complex problems that we face in this nation's military readiness. And I want to welcome our new members here today as well, and I won't go name by name, but I look forward to working with each of you, and we have some very important and challenging issues ahead for us this year. For this hearing, I'd like to welcome our distinguished panel of experts. This afternoon, we have with us Mr. John Conger, performing the duties of the Assistant Secretary of Defense, Energy, Installations, and Environment. Ms. Catherine Hammock, Assistant Secretary of the Army, Installations, Energy, and Environment. Mr. Dennis McGinn, Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Energy, Installations, and Environment. And Ms. Miranda Ballantyne, Assistant Secretary of the Air Force, Installations, Environment, and Energy. And this hearing today is critically important in helping us understand and evaluate this year's infrastructure budget as it relates to readiness. Although we recognize that the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2013 provided some release over the last 2 years, even if funded at the current President's budget request level, the Department continues to take risk in infrastructure in its effort to balance force structure, modernization, and readiness. The infrastructure budget that we have before us today includes $8.4 billion for military construction, family housing, and BRAC, $10.8 billion for facility sustainment, restoration, and modernization, representing 81% of the total sustainment requirement, and a request for an additional round of base realignment and closure with a $10.5 million request for BRAC analytical efforts. As the witnesses today testify, I would ask that you address the following questions. How has the Department aligned infrastructure investments with the long-term defense strategic requirements? What level of risk in installations has the Department taken on? And what mitigation efforts has the Department implemented or plans to implement in the installations portfolio? I'd like now to turn to our ranking member, Madeline Bordallo, for any remarks that she may have. Madeline, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I, too, it's an honor to serve with you again as the ranking member on the Readiness Subcommittee. And I thank all of our witnesses for their testimony today. This committee's focus is on the readiness of our armed services. Though sometimes overlooked, the Department's infrastructure is the platform from which it generates the military readiness. The airfields our military operates from, the ranges where they train, and the facilities that support the maintenance of weapon systems all contribute to the overall readiness of the force. In recent years, the amount of investment in infrastructure has assumed a certain level of risk due to budget pressures placed on the Department, and this has meant deferring maintenance of facilities and postponing the recapitalization of aging infrastructure. As this committee begins its review of the President's budget request for fiscal year 2016, I am encouraged to see the increased level of investment in our military's infrastructure, especially to support the rebalance of the Asia-Pacific region. However, if we are to sustain and continue this important investment, it is absolutely critical that Congress removes the Budget Control Act. Failing to repeal sequestration will undermine our nation's military, including these infrastructure investments. The current budget proposal already assumes a level of risk, but going below these levels is simply unacceptable. These infrastructure investments support the Department's ability to generate readiness, and we have placed significant risk on future readiness by delaying needed maintenance and recapitalization of our facilities over the last several years. The President's budget is a step in the right direction, but we cannot let the investment go below that level. So I'm encouraged by the progress being made in the realignment to the Asia-Pacific region, and I believe there are important investments to support this strategy in the FY16 budget submission. In cooperation with the government of Japan, a steady stream of funding has been programmed to support the realignment of Marines from Okinawa to Guam and the infrastructure investments associated with the move. And I fully support this continued effort. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to the testimonies of our witnesses.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bordallo. Witnesses, as you can see from the length of mine and the ranking member's opening statement, we intend to keep today's opening statements brief. So I would ask, if you would, if you have an opening statement, we will take everything that you have for the record, but I would ask that in your opening statements that you keep things brief and to the point so we can maximize the interaction between members and our witnesses. So Mr. Conger, we'll begin with you.
Chairman Whitman, Ranking Member Bordallo, distinguished members of the subcommittee, I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the Department's fiscal year 2016 budget request for energy installations and environment. My written statement addresses the budget request in detail, so instead of summarizing it, I'd just like to raise two topics for you to consider as we enter into today's discussion. First, we cannot contemplate the budget request without considering the context of the Budget Control Act caps. The Department submitted a budget request that was $35 billion higher than the caps and $38 billion higher than last year. Forcing us to adhere to the caps would have reverberations across the budget. The President's budget request includes a significant increase for facilities over last year's request. That's nearly $2 billion increase in MILCON and $2.5 billion increase in facility sustainment and recapitalization. Legislation will be required to provide relief from the BCA caps, and the relief provided, like the relief provided by the Bipartisan Budget Act a couple of years ago. If you must adhere to the BCA caps, Congress will have to cut $35 billion from our request, and that will certainly have to consider cutting funds from the request for facilities. The second topic that I wanted to raise for your consideration as we go forward is BRAC. It should be no surprise that we are again requesting authority to conduct a BRAC round. As we deal with this constrained budget environment, with considerable force structure decreases since 2005, we must look for ways to divest excess bases and to reduce the cost of supporting our smaller force structure. A few key points I wanted to lay out in support of our request for BRAC. First, the Army and Air Force have done analyses indicating that they have 18% and 30% excess capacity, respectively. And I'll note that the Army's analysis is based on a 490,000 soldier figure, not the projected 450,000. This aligns with our prediction based on the analysis performed in 2004 that we have significant excess capacity that would point to the need to have a BRAC round. Second, partially in response to Congress's urging, we conducted a BRAC-like review of European facilities delivered to Congress in January of 2015, which we project will save more than $500 million annually once implemented. I'd be happy to discuss that as well. And third, in this budget environment, a new BRAC round would have to be focused on efficiencies. I know BRAC 2005 was unpopular, but the recommendations from that round that were designed to save money did, and the reason that the round cost so much was because we accepted a large number of recommendations that were not designed to save money. If you break out the roughly half and half of the recommendations, half the recommendations were not designed to save money within 7 years. Those cost $29 billion and only had $1 billion of recurring savings annually. That's not based on a business case. That was based on things that we decided we needed to do. The other half of the recommendations were designed to save money, and they cost $6 billion and return $3 billion a year annually. Spending $6 billion to get $3 billion a year, that's a good business case. And what that shows is when we do try to save money, we can. The new issue that I've heard raised this year is that we can't expect Congress to pass our legislative proposal for BRAC because it mirrors the 2005 BRAC legislation. I understand the reality that no matter how many times the administration asserts that a future BRAC round will be about cost savings, Congress may want more than just our assurance. We can't just say, trust us. And so let me be clear. We're open to a discussion on this point, and I would like to solicit your suggestions as to specific changes in the BRAC legislation that would make it more acceptable. We want to know what would address your concerns. Thanks for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Conger. Ms. Hammack?
Chairman Whitman, Ranking Member Bordallo, and other members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Army's 2016 military construction budget. The velocity of instability around the world has increased, and the Army is now operating on multiple continents simultaneously in ways unforeseen a year ago. Although we believe we can meet the primary missions of the Defense Strategic Guidance today, our ability to do so has become tenuous. Fiscal challenges brought on by the Budget Control Act strain our ability to bring into balance readiness, modernization, and end strength. Even as demand for Army forces is growing, budget cuts are forcing us to reduce end strength and base support to dangerously low levels. We face a mismatch between requirements and resources. Although for 2016, the Army is asking for a 26% increase from fiscal year 15 in military construction, family housing, and the base closure activities, our $1.6 billion request is a 33% reduction from 14 and a 55% reduction from 13. As force structures decline, we must right-size the supporting infrastructure. We must achieve a balance between the cost of sustaining infrastructure and Army readiness. Degraded readiness makes it more difficult for us to provide for the common defense. The BCA increases risk for sending insufficiently trained and under-equipped soldiers into harm's way, and that is not a risk our nation should accept. We need a round of base closure and realignment in 2017. Without a BRAC and the realized cost savings, the only alternative is to make up for shortages in base funding by increasing risk in readiness. We conducted a facility capacity analysis, as John Conger mentioned, based on our 2013 audited real property data, and determined that our excess facility capacity will be 18% when we reach 490,000 at the end of this year. As we shrink further, more excess capacity is created. We must size and shape Army facilities for the force we support. The European Infrastructure Consolidation Review addressed excess capacity in Europe. For the Army, an investment of $363 million results in annual savings of $163 million, which is less than a 3-year payback. We are now facing critical decisions that will impact our capability and capacity for the next decade. It is important that we make the right decisions now. Without savings from a BRAC round, the risk is that our installations will experience larger cuts than would otherwise occur. We look forward to working with Congress to ensure the Army is capable of fulfilling its many missions. And on behalf of soldiers, families, and civilians in the best Army in the world, thank you for your support and the opportunity to discuss the Army's budget. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Hammack. Ms. Ballantyne?
Chairman Whitman, Ranking Member Bordallo, esteemed members of the committee, it's my honor and privilege to be here to testify before you today to discuss the Air Force's installation, environment, and energy budget. I thank you for your support in giving the Air Force much needed relief in 2014 and 15 from untenable sequestration levels. Without Budget Control Act relief in FY16, the risk assumed to Air Force infrastructure could have sober impacts to Air Force readiness. The Air Force strives to ensure airmen have ready installations, resilient environmental infrastructure, and reliable energy. As of today, I've been on the job for 135 days. I've visited 10 bases in those 22 weeks, and I've looked at hundreds of facilities where our aircraft are maintained, where our airmen work, and where our military families live. And from those travels, I can tell you there is more we can do to improve the affordability and viability of our installations, which today are simply too big, too old, and too expensive to operate. The Air Force has about 30% excess infrastructure capacity, as Mr. Conger alluded to. Our facilities have an average age of 40 years old, and many are much older, in fact, about a quarter are over 50 years old. And if you combine excess infrastructure capacity with aging buildings, the bottom line is that our facilities and installations are simply too expensive. When facing unaffordable installations, there's really only two ways to get at the problem. You can either spend more money on them or you can make them cost less. It's a pretty simple equation. Therefore, rather than living with forced sequestration levels, we're requesting an installations budget figures in FY16 substantially closer to what we need. And the Air Force is supporting OSD's request for a base realignment and closure round in 2017, which will allow us to comprehensively, transparently align installation and infrastructure with our mission imperatives. The FY16 budget that the Air Force is requesting allows us to begin to chip away at the backlog of infrastructure recapitalization needs and maintenance that has contributed to the degradation of our combat readiness. Our $1.6 billion FY16 MILCON request is more than 65% higher than last year. Our $3.2 billion PB16 request for FSRM is more than 35% higher than last year. In addition to MILCON, O&M, and BRAC, I'm also really excited about accelerating the use of additional tools to help our installations be more affordable. Tools like enhanced use leases have proven successful in leveraging other resources to meet our requirements. Power purchase agreements and energy service performance contracts have helped the Air Force cut electricity prices and get renewable energy with no capital outlays. Community partnerships, which you may know as P4 from some of your communities, allow us to leverage the resources and capabilities of our community members. Taken together, improved MILCOM and facilities O&M budgets, plus BRAC, and the range of other tools and programs that I've described really make me optimistic that we can restore the Air Force infrastructure to the place it needs to be. Chairman Whitman, Ranking Member Bordallo, members of the committee, thank you again for the opportunity to represent America's Airmen today, and I ask for your full support of the FY16 request and look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Ballantyne. Mr. McGinn?
Chairman Whitman, Ranking Member Bordallo, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to present the Department of the Navy, our Navy and Marine Corps' shore readiness overview. The difference between requirements and resources equals risk. And I think the focus that, Mr. Chairman, you laid out is right on the mark. We need to assess how much that risk is, how it manifests itself, and what we can do to mitigate it. I'm glad to report that in our budget submittal for this year, we are starting to make progress in addressing the delta between our requirements and our resources. However, we still have a ways to go, and there are risks that persist. As Ranking Member Bordallo pointed out, these installations do represent the jumping-off platform and the place you come home to after going to serve our nation's security in all parts of the world. And our Navy and Marine Corps team deserve the absolute very best in terms of mission readiness that is delivered through our shipyards, our readiness centers, our bases that support them in many cases in real time while they are conducting operations overseas in combat. So thank you again for holding this hearing, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. McGinn. In the interest of making sure that we get to all of our committee members today for questions, I'm going to delay my questions until the end, and we'll go now to Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate all our guests being here. I appreciate your testimony. There are many things upon which I think we can agree, and you've also given us a chance of saying no again. So I appreciate that testimony. Ms. Hammack, if I could address you with a parochial issue, I would appreciate that opportunity. As you know, the DGRC, the rail facility at Hill Air Force Base in my district, I have not heard much from that lately. Are the negotiations progressing in moving that antiquated facility?
No, the Army has no plans to move the DGRC that is currently located on Hill Air Force Base.
Thank you for the answer. Not a good answer, but I thank you for the answer. As you know, the Enhanced Use Lease Project, and why don't you do that right now, is going to create another 15,000 jobs, hopefully up there, as well as giving us a force to try and modernize that particular base. As you understand, let me just show you. This area is your facility right through here. This is obviously what the Utah Transportation Authority is going to have to do to go around you at a great deal of expense, obviously, to the state of Utah. But what that does, if you can see, is it puts you outside the parameter of the gate, which simply means that there will have to be an additional gate for that facility, which will require additional guards 24/7. Hill does not have, for this Army facility on an Air Force base, the Air Force is not giving additional manpower billets to Hill. So how does the Army want to help account for this extra requirement and costs that building a new gate, as well as the facilities and maintenance of that particular area?
The Army does not have the budget to move that mission, and there's no military reason to move the mission.
Well, oh good, I'm glad you said that, because the Army Corps of Engineers recently did a study, and they estimated the cost of relocating to Anniston minus personnel costs would be approximately $11 million. However, I understand that you are planning in your budget to appropriate $11 million to fix up the rails that are going into that antiquated building, just the rails alone, not the building itself. The Army Corps also did, in their study, said that you would recoup that money within 11 years if you're actually moving that into a modern facility that can actually meet the needs of the Army. So since you're going to spend the amount of money one way or the other, why in the world would anyone want to spend that much money for the rails into an antiquated facility when you can actually get a better facility if you just spend the money the first way of moving it, which is the right thing to do? Why in heaven's name would you not want to do that?
The cost to move is estimated at $17 million.
That's not what the Army Corps of Engineers did in their study. It was 11-11. You're spending the same amount of money.
And the
Why are you
cost to
still so
fix
stubborn
the
about
tracks
this?
is estimated around $9 million.
Once again, that's not what the study came up with.
We seem to have different numbers. Right now, there's
certainly
no
do.
military reason to move the mission off of Hill Air Force Base, where it's been since the 40s.
Then how are you going to fund the extra gate, the extra manpower, the extra maintenance equipment? How are you going to fund that? Or are you just going to shove that onto the Air Force so they have to fund the extra stuff?
Currently, the enhanced use lease has not moved into this area. They have not developed this area, and we have not seen a timetable for their planned development.
Ms. Hammock, you know it's moving to that area. We have the timetable. We have the plans. You've seen that not only from the state, but also from the Air Force. You still are not moving that. It's going to spend $11 million one way or the other. Why not do it the intelligent way? And maybe you can tell me, from whence is this $11 million coming in the first place? What pot have you found that to try and redo the rails, and only the rails going into an old building?
The rail improvement has to do with life, health, safety reasons for the current mission at Hill Air Force Base.
So from what pot of money is that coming?
That's coming from sustainment, restoration, and modernization.
So you couldn't use that to actually put it into a new modern facility that would recoup its benefits within 3 years?
No, that would take military construction, and we don't have the budget to move the mission.
So you can't move money from one budget to another one. You insist on finding a way for moving the same amount of money from one pot to the other pot. Is that what you're telling me?
I would say if you approve a BRAC, this would be something that would be
If
analyzed.
we approved a
in
BRAC, nothing would change at all. If you got the money, you got the money. If you don't have the money, you don't have the money. But this is one of those things that I don't understand the stubbornness of the Army in not looking at the broader issue and realizing there is a better way of doing this. And with that, if you have a response that's going to make me happy within the next 34 seconds, because that's all I got, go for it. Otherwise, I'll still be mad. I'd still be mad. I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Ms. Bordallo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary McGuinn, I have a question for you. Can you give me an update on the expected release date of the final supplemental environmental impact statement and the record of decision regarding the marine realignment? And the second part of the question also, can you comment on why the Navy has requested funds for the live fire training range at Northwest Field, even though the NEPA process has not concluded yet?
I'll answer the second question first. We've requested those funds in anticipation that the NEPA process will have been completed in order to execute those funds in FY16. The process leading us through the supplemental environmental impact statement is going well. We anticipate being able to assign a record of decision no later than the end of this spring. And we're working very, very closely with other federal entities to make sure that there aren't any showstoppers between now and then. As you know, there's been a lot of work that's gone into this, a lot of analysis, but I feel confident at this point to say that we will bring the process to a successful conclusion, and we will have a record of decision, and we will be able to execute those funds for the live fire training facility.
Thank you very much. Mr. Conger, can you give us an update on the EAC process regarding impacts to Guam associated with the Marine realignment? And can you discuss the findings and the results of last year's meeting? Has anything changed regarding civilian infrastructure requirements over the past year?
Sure. So as you recall, last June we had a formal EAC meeting, Economic Adjustment Committee meeting. It's a federal interagency meeting. You were there. The governor sent remarks, and we were able to discuss the fact that the plan has significantly changed. The impacts are going to be significantly reduced, but we needed to still assess what those impacts were going to be and come up with cost estimates for how we were going to be able to mitigate the impacts that we were going to have through the rebasing action that we were contemplating. That analysis is ongoing, but based on what I have seen preliminarily, the cost will be significantly less than what we were originally projecting based on the original EIS. I think that makes sense. When you significantly reduce the footprint, you're going to have significantly smaller impacts. I think the department is committed to mitigating the impacts that we have, but the final study with those cost estimates will not be released until or approximately the same time as the ROD comes out, because we want them to agree. We are working in conjunction with the folks working the supplemental EIS, and there are going to be synergistic documents.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, I have a couple other questions, but if we do a second round, I'll continue. So I yield back.
Thank you. We'll definitely do a second round. We'll now go to Mr. Stefanik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all the witnesses here today. My question is for Ms. Hammack. Non-commissioned officers are the backbone of the armed services. They are responsible for executing missions, training younger enlisted service members, and guiding young junior officers. NCOs are such a strategic feature in the U.S. Army, and the President's FY16 budget permits the construction of an NCO training center at Fort Drum in New York's 21st District, which I have the honor of representing. The academy will be built in place of the current dilapidated World War II-era buildings. Regrettably, this imperative project runs the risk of being canceled due to sequestration and the Budget Control Act. Can you share with the other members here today other examples of failing Army infrastructure due to FY13 sequestration or lack of maintenance and modernization efforts, or potential projects or missions that will be discontinued?
Thank you for the question. You're absolutely right. Due to the impacts of sequestration in fiscal years 13 and 14, we have an increasing number of failing facilities. Right now, 7% of Army's facilities are in failing condition, yet they still have operating units in them. 24% of Army facilities are in poor condition, and the number of failing or poor increases every year. Sustainment is the lowest cost method of maintaining a building. You sustain it. If you do not sustain a building properly, if you underinvest, then it falls into restoration and modernization. Instead of fixing one leak, you have to replace a roof. It's much more costly. And so we saw a 9% increase in requirements for restoration and modernization directly due to impacts of underfunding in 13 and 14 due to sequestration. The risk is, though, as we do not have enough money in restoration and modernization, you increase those buildings that are failing, and those are the ones that have to be replaced with MILCON, which is even a much higher cost. So we're increasing the cost for future generations due to sequestration right now.
My follow-up question, you just stated the high percentage of installations that are in failing condition or poor condition. As we continue to have this conversation about BRAC, shouldn't the Army be doing its job and investing in installations that are in poor or failing condition?
The Army is working to invest in failing facilities. As a matter of fact, some of the projects that are on the MILCON list for FY16 are to replace failing facilities. One is a wastewater treatment plant at West Point. And so the low amount of dollars we have, we're using to invest in failing facilities. The challenge is that facilities are failing at a rate faster than we're being funded. So we get into a requirements versus resources issue. We are underfunded and we have more requirements than the budget is allowing us to fix. So that results in an increasing number of failing facilities.
For the record, I want to state my support of the construction of the NCO Training Center at Fort Drum. Thank you for the answers to the question. I do believe that we need to be focused on making sure that our poor or failing condition installations receives the funding that they need, especially Fort Drum. And I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Stefanik. We'll now go to Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses. First of all, I just want to, again, publicly acknowledge, Mr. McGinn, your work with the state of Connecticut at the Groton Subbase, the microgrid project, which is a collaboration between the state government, private, utility, stakeholders, as well as the Navy, is, in my opinion, a model for how to sort of deal with that basic infrastructure, particularly for coastal areas where climate change is going to require hardened sources of energy. Again, you've been doing great work, and it's much appreciated. During the testimony this afternoon, your colleagues were pretty specific about analysis that was done to identify excess capacity. I think it was 30% in the case of the Air Force, Ms. Ballantyne, and Ms. Hammack was 18%. Your testimony didn't include that kind of analysis, and I'm curious whether the Navy has looked at a similar projection that you could share.
We have not yet done a capacity analysis. As you may know, starting in 1991 with the very first BRAC, the Department of the Navy, and since then, has closed 56 major installations. We've closed overall, all installations, over 250. As a result, the match of our force structure, our end strength, and our facilities is a little bit closer, perhaps, than my colleagues in the Army and the Air Force. However, we would welcome BRAC in its disciplined analysis in which we are able to make business cases for having the alignment right or not. But we are prepared, and we work very closely with Mr. Conger and his staff, and coordinate with my service counterparts to make sure that we are using the best tools available to determine if we do have excess capacity.
So again, looking recently, Admiral Greenert, when he was asked about BRAC, and I'm quoting him right now, "I'm always open to a BRAC. It's a good process, but I'm satisfied with the Navy's infrastructure as it exists today, base infrastructure, and that in the Navy, I'm satisfied with my base laydown there in that regard." So again, just so I understand better the value of a BRAC to the Navy, it's really just kind of a stress test, or
that's a good analogy, I think, a stress test. And I would say that had we not had prior BRAC rounds, we would be in really, really rough shape in terms of our shore readiness, our infrastructure mismatch. And I think that is the case certainly across the whole Department of Defense. So we would welcome it. We always look for ways to do the right thing in terms of matching the resources where they can do the most good in terms of readiness outcome. And we are prepared to participate fully in another round of BRAC.
Okay, thank you for your answer. Mr. Conger, in your testimony, which you didn't get a chance to get around to, you talked about housing issues that you are in charge of or overlooking. The privatization of base housing has been, in my opinion, a great success. The transformation that's occurred at the Navy base in Groton, which again was actually kind of disgraceful in terms of the conditions that sailors and their families were living in, has been just, again, completely changed because of the infusion of new capital that the developers have sort of brought to the table. But I would just share with you, there's one unintended effect, which is, again, the terms of these developments is that, again, military personnel get first dibs. Federal employees get second dibs, and if there's unoccupied units, then the units are made available to non-affiliated families. In Groton right now, there's about 100 to 130 school children that are attending Groton schools. Because the development is property tax exempt and they get no impact aid because they don't fall into the impact aid sort of classification, the host community ends up taking the hit in terms of the per pupil expenditure for schools there. And I'm on the Education Committee. You know, we looked at this question a little bit in terms of the ESEA bill. It's not something that really is ripe yet for an amendment, but we are working with the impact aid community out there, and I hope, again, we can reach out to you and your staff in terms of trying to get an acceptable situation. The host communities are doing the right thing, educating these kids when their parents are off you know, serving the country, and we should make sure that, again, they don't get sort of left holding the bag in terms of the cost of that. And with that, I'd yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Courtney. Now we're going to go to Mr. Nugent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And one of the questions, and I'm not, as some of my colleagues are absolutely opposed to BRAC, I'm not. But I haven't been convinced that we're in a position, you know, I see the numbers, particularly I know the Army's numbers in regards to reductions. What I'm concerned about is 3 years from now, 4 years from now, we change the metric and we change where we are in regards to reduction of forces, because I think that most of us on armed services agree that we're not in a good spot in regards to our force structure. So, you know, putting all that into place, that we actually could be above those numbers or equal to the numbers that we were at this year. How do you fix that so you're not coming back here 4 years from now or 5 years from now saying, oh my gosh, you know, you all got your act together, you got rid of sequestration, we're actually funding the military at the proper level, and now we need more capacity. How do you assure us of that?
When we look at BRAC, we look at many different factors, and we also look at a 20-year force structure plan. But if you think back, the Army at World War II was a force of 8 million. We built warehouses and barracks and office buildings and training locations for a force of 8 million. And through the years, we've reduced our excess infrastructure, but we have excess infrastructure left over from World War II, whether they're barracks or office buildings or dining facilities or stuff that we have never completely sized down to a force of 490, which is where we'll be at the end of this year.
So if we go back to 562, let's just say, for the sake of argument, if you resize your capacity in housing and structures, how is that going to affect us if we do go back to that number?
There's many different things that we can do. One of the highest military values is training lands, land on which you can train soldiers. When you talk about housing soldiers, there's many different ways to house soldiers, whether you're talking about tents or whether you're talking about 2 per room. In the last 10 years, we've doubled the size of a dorm or a barracks room to the point where you can put a bunk bed in there and it can be just as comfortable as a dorm room at a university. So we have the surge capability to expand and contract the Army. What we want to do is what we did in the European infrastructure analysis, which is consolidate to our most critical, most important assets to give us that flex capability to better manage the budgets that we have. Otherwise, we're spreading a smaller budget across the same number of installations. And when you underman or when you have empty buildings, they decay faster than occupied buildings. We'd like to put some of these buildings into productive reuse in communities. And if you look at BRAC, there's many success stories in communities where there are now community colleges or business parks. One is in Massachusetts, Fort Devens, where there's now a movie studio, there's a $1 billion Bayer manufacturing plant. The Garden Reserve are using the training lands. The old cantonment area, there's a new hotel in there, there's restaurants in there. It's turned into a very vibrant business park, and it supports the Reserve and Guard mission. So I think there's many opportunities for us to become more efficient in our real estate so that we can continue to support the military for the long term.
I would hope it would not, like I said, BRAC, if that ever gets to that point, that the training facilities is paramount. I have 3 sons currently in the Army, 2 active duty, 1 National Guard Black Hawk pilot. And their ability to have those areas is paramount to their mission. And I just want to give you a side note. When my older son came back from Afghanistan, I want to say it was 08, 09, back to Fort Bragg, and there was a huge, if you remember, there was a huge uproar because they were supposed to come back to new barracks, and they came back to the same junk that they were in when I saw my son off, my wife and I. So what you've done, though, has been remarkable. I will tell you the privatization at Fort Rucker and other areas where I've had other, my other sons at, they've done an excellent job. I'll give you credit that you've really done a good job in those areas. So I want to thank you for that, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Nugent. We'll now go to Mr. O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wanted to begin by asking Ms. Hammack to follow up on a comment that she made. Seemed like you were providing us a choice between sustaining infrastructure that we might not need and readiness. And I would like you to sharpen that point, if you will, and tell us just exactly what's at stake in terms of the readiness.
What's at stake in readiness is our ability to fund training, our ability to ensure that soldiers are trained and equipped. So when we look at our budget, it is a balance. And as we're reducing force structure, we can't reduce force structure at the same pace as we're asked to reduce budgets. So then you look at reducing training. Well, we don't want to deploy an untrained soldier. Then you look at reducing equipment, but we don't want to under-equip a soldier. And so the last part of the budget pot is sustainment on our installations, and we've cut that to bare bones level. We are right now maintaining or sustaining our installations to life, health, safety levels.
Can you, you also touched upon this, but I wonder if you have some numbers to really drive it home. You talked about the cost of deferred maintenance. If you're going to patch a leak in the roof in year 1 and you don't, and you wait till year 10 and you've got to replace a whole roof, what in numbers, what is that costing us? That opportunity to fix it today versus waiting for it to metastasize, 10 years down the road.
Let me give you a scale of cost. If you think just bare sustainment in a building, and that's just the structure itself, is about 30 cents a square foot. If you don't patch that leak in the roof and you now have to replace the roof, that gets to about $30 a square foot. If you don't fix the roof in time and the structure decays and you have to replace it, that's $300 a square foot. So the lowest cost is to adequately sustain a building. But right now we're $3 billion backlog with 5,500 major work orders in sustaining Army installations. We do not have the funding to sustain installations because we're putting our funding into training and equipping and maintaining the force so that we can do the missions asked of us by this nation. It's a tough decision. We're not maintaining the installations the way I would like to. We are not sustaining the installations the way I think we should, but we are deploying our soldiers the way I think we should.
We're supposed to be down to a force of 450,000 by 2017?
2018, 490 by the end of this year. Okay. And then by 2018 down to 450, which has risk associated with that.
What happens if we don't do anything, if we don't follow these recommendations, if we don't ultimately address the 18% of overcapacity that you have within the Army? And I guess what I'm getting at is, will there be a recommendation for a further drawdown so that the force that we do have is ready, albeit smaller, and at a level where we're sustaining the infrastructure. Is that potentially a choice that we're looking at down the road?
The risk right now, we are doing an analysis, a supplemental programmatic environmental assessment to see where we would take the cuts in Manning to go down to a force of 450. Some bases we're evaluating cuts of 15,000 personnel, both uniform and civilian. So if you have a base of 30,000 and we take a cut of 15,000 in order to live within the resources we have, that means fully 50% of the structures on that base could be underutilized or empty or decaying to a point where they're failing. So they're of no use to the community and they're of no use to the Army. And if we ever have to surge, we'd have to rebuild and build new.
Thanks. That helps me to better understand this issue. And before I yield back to the chair, I just want to thank you for your accessibility and responsiveness on issues that we brought to your attention in the 2 years that I've been here. We really appreciate your support at Fort Bliss. With that, I yield back to the chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke. I just want to get a perspective question in here. I think it's the right time to Mr. Conger. Can you tell me from the 2005 BRAC when you expect to accrue positive savings from that BRAC?
So we are accruing approximately $4 billion of savings a year. The investment that
net for the entire period of time. Tell me when you will recover what you spent for that BRAC.
So based on the $35 billion of investment and $4 billion of recurring savings, it nets out in 2018. I will note,
So
however,
2005 to 2018 is, I'm not a good mathematician, but 13 years. So it
but
takes,
yeah, the implementation period does not have the spend evenly across that. The savings was not $4 billion a year from the beginning, but it was from the end. There was a factor in the middle of that, but the figure is 2018 for the break-even point.
in a proposed, if you were given permission to pursue a BRAC, tell me the savings that you would accrue within the fiscal year defense plan, better known as the FIT-UP. In other words, money that you could actually plan to spend.
So we've done a projection. Obviously, everything depends on the specific recommendations, but we have a projection that we're using for planning, and within that projection, we expect to spend. And oh, by the way, we based it on the kind of an efficiency background that we anticipate. That includes the ones we did in the 90s and the efficiency recommendations from the 2005 round, that kind of pattern, the spend plan. We expect to spend approximately $6 billion within the scope of that 6-year period, and we expect to recoup approximately $6 billion in savings within that 6-year period and $2 billion a year from then on out. That's based on a 5% infrastructure reduction. So I'd also note that, to address the previous question, if we anticipate that we have 20%, whatever the 18 to 30% of excess, we're not proposing to eliminate all of the excess. This is the lowest military value property that we have that we would target.
So your net would at best be questionable within a period of time where you could actually save the dollars. And if you're going to use the same spend plan assumptions that you used in 2005, which underestimated costs, overestimated savings, and took 13 years to accrue savings, it's questionable at best about the dollars that would be available within the FIT-UP. So the assertion that those dollars would be available for readiness, I believe, certainly leaves much for analysis to consider what would actually be able to be planned to be spent in readiness accounts.
I think it is fair to say that we would not complete the implementation of a BRAC round within the scope of a FIT-UP, because by definition it takes longer.
Yeah, and there's a lot of money that has to be spent up front in order to get a BRAC going.
You spend money to save money. There's no question about that.
Yeah. But asserting, like Ms. Hammack did, that somehow that tomorrow our men and women in uniform are going to get that training because we're going to start to close bases, I think is a bridge too far. With that, we will go now to Mr. Gibson.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the panelists being here. After 13 plus years of war, we're now looking to reset the force, restore some full spectrum capabilities, enhance our ability to strategically maneuver. And so my question is going to be about the Global Response Force. My last year which was in 2010, I culminated as the 2nd Brigade Commander of the 82nd. We were the ground component for the Global Response Force. A lot to be proud of there in many ways, but underwhelmed by our ability as a country to sort of pull together and support strategic maneuver from an installation platform perspective. So, Mr. Conger, I'm interested to know, and to illustrate, we have Pope, we had Fort Bragg, and then we had Pope Air Force Base, which we have merged, which I think was a move, emotional to be sure, but a move in the right direction. But, C-17s are hours away, and even the C-130s there, we now have moved away. So from the DoD's perspective, what's being done to complement the reset and to look from an installation standpoint that would support strategic maneuver? It can be the Army Air Force integration, which I think is particularly needing focus, but it can also be from a Navy and Marine Corps perspective too, from East and West Coast. I'm interested in any of that. And then the other panelists can jump in too.
So my instinct is to let the other panelists jump in first. I don't have a specific answer to your question. I'd
Well,
have to take it for the record.
candidly, with due respect, that's really reinforcing my point, is that I think we've really lacked a national perspective on this. It's certainly not in your inbox per se at this moment, but take it back, that, as a guy who was the brigade commander for the Army's element that was the Global Response Force, I was looking for more joint perspective, more national support. For example, unexpectedly, and I think the President made the right call, he deployed us to Haiti in the immediate aftermath of the devastating earthquake that occurred there in January of 2010. And my paratroopers, we 3 days into this deployment, we had 200 paratroopers on the ground because we didn't have the platforms. The platforms were being directed towards Afghanistan. We had significant challenges in cycling, and this was an important mission the President had directed. And so, from an installation standpoint, I think that ultimately we've got to do better as far as crafting the force so that we can be a strategic deployment platform. So, I do think that is going to require more DoD involvement. I think there's got to be some modeling and simulation that comes, and the Joint Staff's involved in that. But since it appears that you'd like to go out to your to the services here, I'd be interested in if any of them have anything to say as far as strategic maneuverability and deployability, what initiatives you may have afoot.
I'd also take that one for the record. It's a little bit outside of the purview of my portfolio, but we'll get back to you with some more details.
We do want to ensure that our installations are strategic deployment platforms, and that does require an investment. You're absolutely right. Right now there is a focus on the Middle East from much of the Army's perspective. And the concern that the chief has is, are we able to have multiple deployments at the same time? We're challenged right now with the areas that we are deployed in around the world. And will we be able to respond to something on a moment's notice? We're concerned right now that the readiness levels within the Army are some of the lowest they've ever been. And that is because we do not have the money to invest in it. We are at about 33% readiness, if I remember the numbers right. We don't agree that that's where we should be, but we have not been resourced. So we are challenged as we are reducing our installation funding as low as we possibly can so that we can put money in training to try and increase the readiness, so that we can put money in our equipping so that we can equip our soldiers. But the challenge right now is, with 50% of the Army budget in manning and the increases in pay and benefits every year, it's getting bigger and bigger every year and forcing the Army to take risk in some of these other areas. It is not an equation that's in balance right now.
Well, ma'am, thank you very much. Chairman, this is, I know I've been on this point for some time, but,
yes,
as we're looking to really restore deterrence, which is very important to us, peace through strength, we've got work to do to restore this capability, the Global Response Force. We've been working on it for a number of years, but part of it is including installations. So thank you for the opportunity.
Mr. Gibson, thank you. I think that's a great point, making sure there's strategic alignment. Anytime that you're looking at the idea of installation capacity, you want to make sure that as you're looking at that, alignment takes a front stage when it comes to making sure we're making the right decisions. And with that, we'll go to Mrs. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the hearing today obviously is really a good point for why there have been BRACs in the past, and there's just no question that members of Congress, and for that matter, I think a lot of the personnel on our installations also weigh in at these times, and it's sometimes very difficult to see where the benefit will be moving forward. But I wonder, I really need to press you to go a little bit further with this, because I think that, this is the Readiness Committee, and so it seems logical that one would be able to capture the resources that are needed out of our infrastructure to move in a different direction. And I think you've spoken to that, but it's not convincing, I think, to a lot of the members, because the benefits do not accrue for some time with base closures. So how do you make the argument then? How do you move forward with why it's essential to do this at this time? You've talked about it's money that's not being spent if we don't have to sustain some of the installations. Clearly, the room that we need is not necessarily where it's available. And so that's, there's just no way of aligning some of those things across the country. I'm just wondering, how are you going to move forward with these arguments? Because I see a real benefit in doing that. From my community, I've seen it, but on the other hand, I know how possessive people are on a number of our facilities as well for giving up an inch of land.
Congress asked us to take a look, and I'll give it to you in just a minute. Congress asked us to take a look at our European infrastructure and to get that in balance. And that's something that we have done. And we have demonstrated that we have the analytical capability, and we have the intellectual capability to balance our installations, to consolidate into locations that enable us to fight the fight for the next 50 years. Some of the things that we are closing and consolidating out of in Germany are just the same issues that we have here, remnants and leftovers from World War II that we are closing out of that are inefficient to operate. We need to do that same kind of analysis. The fact that it has less than a 3-year return on investment for the Army is the same kind of analysis that we need to do here and present to a commission to give you something to take a look at to see where we can achieve those savings. We believe there are savings to be achieved through consolidating onto our most efficient platforms that give us the highest military value so that we are poised for the next 50 years. That's what we're asking for. And Mr. McGinn?
We think in terms of near-term, mid-term, long-term investments and risk assessments. And as Mr. Conger, in answer to your question, Mr. Chairman, pointed out, the return on investment of a BRAC round is not anytime soon. But I would just like to make the point that when you want to close that resources and requirements gap and reduce risk in the form of better readiness, the best way to do it is to put more money in. And that's why we are consistent in, and I know that the committee supports this as well, in our support for the President's budget, or even more, to get away from the bad things that happen as a result of sequestration, the things that are manifesting themselves since it first went into effect in FY13, and we're still digging our way out of the hole on the shore readiness as well as in the platforms.
Let me just sort of close out for on this. From the past 5 BRAC rounds, we're saving $12 to $13 billion a year right now, avoiding the costs. If we had not done them before and said, well, those savings are far out, we'd have a much deeper hole to dig out of today. This is good government. It's thinking about the future, and it's not necessarily about today's immediate problem, because as we've pointed out, this is a medium-term savings we're looking at. We think it pays for itself within the implementation period, but even so, it's not going to solve the $35 billion problem we have today. The way we end up doing that is by making penny wise and pound foolish decisions like underfunding, taking risk in sustainment or smaller MILCON requests. That's the way we've had to deal with it, because we've had an immediate problem to deal with. Facilities degrade slower than readiness does, and we have acknowledged that. And yeah, it's the smart thing to do to take risk in facilities before you take risk in readiness.
Thank you.
Can I weigh in on this briefly from the Air Force's perspective as well? If you look at the 2005 BRAC, that cost the Air Force about $3.7 billion, and we're already saving $1 billion a year. I haven't been in the Air Force very long, as I told you all from the beginning, but I come from the business community, and that's a darn good return on investment. EIC is costing the Air Force $1 billion, and we're going to be saving $315 million a year. That's a good return on investment. Our readiness challenges are not going to be solved overnight, I'm afraid, so we need to get after this infrastructure as soon as possible so that we can start plowing that money back in. And I think it's an important question to ask, are we looking at today's Air Force that's stretched too thin when we're looking at a 30% excess infrastructure? And will we come back 5 years from now if the force structure is closer to where we need it to be and say, oh, darn, we closed some things we shouldn't have closed? And I will tell you that we will, in a BRAC analysis, do a very careful, thoughtful analysis to ensure that we are making sure we've got the right equipment in the right places for the right force structure. We've got to preserve some surge, we've got to preserve some plus-up, and that would all be part of the analysis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Davis. We'll now go to Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to follow up, if I could, on one of the previous questions, just with a statement. You know, your budget request is for $251 million for a BRAC, and then an additional $2 billion in increased spending on military construction. And I think from my standpoint, as somebody who represents a lot of the men and women who are going overseas and fighting, I would rather see that money spent in readiness right now, making sure that the men and women that are being deployed have the training and the equipment that they need, than seeing it built in facilities that will not come online for the next several years to come. And so when we talk about short-term versus long-term needs, I think the priority is making sure those men and women are trained prior to leaving, and that's one of the things that we have to balance. I understand the request for a BRAC is going to continue to come. I understand that at some point there will be a BRAC, and there's a tremendous divide, I think, an extreme lack of trust between Congress and the administration, and I would suggest to you from my standpoint, I think that the administration has well earned that lack of trust from the way I see it. But I'd like to ask a specific question about the Air Force, Ms. Ballantyne. Last year, the Air Force said that they had a 24% excess capacity. This year, the testimony is that it's a 30% excess capacity. Did the process change that the Air Force used to determine that? And if not, what accounts for the additional 6%?
Thanks for the question. Same process. In the 24% number that the Air Force testified to last year was from the 2004 analysis conducted for the 2005 BRAC round. We updated using the same methodology and, in fact, many of the same inputs looking at updated force structure. Since 2004, our overall force structure has come down about 10%. That's about 10% in both personnel and in planned aircraft. So when we reran the analysis with updated numbers, that's where we get to the roughly 30% excess infrastructure capacity.
But just make sure I understand you correctly, you used the 2004, 2005 as the foundation for your analysis.
We used the same process that was congressionally and GAO approved at that time, and same process as 1998.
What were the major facility categories that contained the excesses?
So we looked at 9 categories, and I can certainly meet with you separately or provide for the record much more detail on precisely what we looked at. But we looked at 9 specific categories, ranging from parking aprons to depot labor, space operations, and a number of others within that, and subcategories within those.
Okay, I'd very much appreciate it if we could have, if we could schedule that meeting to look at that,
Happy to do
those
so.
individual issues, and certainly hope if you're visiting Robbins Air Force Base or Moody Air Force Base that you'll let me know that both of those are in my district.
Would love to do that as well, sir.
And I guess the other question I have, Mr. Conger, would be for, you know, as we talk about BRACs and the numbers that the department continues to give us, it seems the department already knows and has some ideas of where they want to make some of these cuts. And I guess my question is, you ask us to keep trusting you with a BRAC, and my comments earlier were certainly not geared towards you. You ask us to keep trusting you with a BRAC, though, and I'm asking you that, you know, trust us with providing that list of where you expect to make those cuts, either by category or by base.
So I guarantee you that I do not have some sort of a secret list. The figures that we've provided are all parametrically based. We try to do that very much.
Let me be, then, and I apologize for interrupting. You know, I get short on time here. Is it too much housing? Is it too much industrial infrastructure? Too much headquarter space? Too many missions? Surely by category, if you can tell us that 1 year it's 24% and 1 year it's 30% in one of the branches, surely that you can tell us the same thing for the Army and the Navy, and you can tell us by category where that excess capacity is.
We can certainly give you a copy of the 2004 study, and the categories are there, and it'll show you where the excess was at that point in time. We haven't done a comprehensive each service across the board redo of that analysis to date.
Then how can you be so confident that it saves money?
So because if you look at the excess that we had then, what small amount we closed in 2005, the reduction in force structure amplifying that excess, we are convinced that there is excess to get after. The BRAC study will identify the low military value locations that we would look to consolidate and close, and we projected, based on a straightforward percentage reduction in infrastructure, what those costs would and savings would be.
As somebody who majored in risk management, I can tell you you've got a lot of multipliers in there.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Ms. Gabbard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for Mr. McGinn with regard to the expected growth in the Navy force structure and the continued shift towards the Pacific. I'm wondering how the Navy is reevaluating its infrastructure capacity and requirements, and specifically, how do the infrastructure requests in this FY16 support this rebalance towards the Asia Pacific, and how this investment is working to facilitate continuing to move the Marines from Okinawa?
As you probably know, that is a long-term, or I'd say mid-term project. We'll see the first Marines moving actually into Guam around 2020, 2021. And it'll take several years to complete it. We are starting already in terms of spending MILCON dollars. In fact, the question that Ms. Bordallo asked earlier about spending money to prepare live fire training ranges in Guam is an example of that, where we are 5 years in advance in order to make sure they are ready when those Marines come, because they are going to be a rapidly deployable force. And we are also looking across the board at support structures like housing, for example, for Marines and their family, working with the United States Air Force at Anderson Air Force Base to make sure that we are going to have Marines and Air Force personnel and families using that area instead of doing it separately. So I guess the short answer is simply we are very carefully going through what the requirements to maintain a ready, deployable Marine force with live fire, with air combat element, ground combat element, and special forces moving back from Okinawa to Guam and to Hawaii as well. Australia is another area. The Chief of Naval Operations was just down there. But we are looking at this very carefully, and also not just counting the troops, but what is it in terms of infrastructure and the projects that will improve or create that infrastructure that will make them truly ready.
Thank you. And Ms. Hammack, you know, the number of troop reductions that we're projecting now and that we will continue to see should sequester continue, obviously is of deep concern to many of us. In Hawaii, there have been proposed very deep cuts both at Fort Shafter and at Schofield Barracks. And I'm wondering if you can speak to really what are the real life impacts on this Asia-Pacific focus, on programs like General Brooks' Pacific Pathways of reaching out and proactively engaging many partners in the region, how this cut would affect that mission.
When we're taking a look at how we're downsizing, we're taking into account the many missions that the military has. General Odierno, in a hearing end of January, made a comment that sequestration is impacting Pacific Pathways, and we will not be able to do as much as we think we should do, or as General Brooks thinks we should do there. When we're looking at force structure reductions, we're having to take a look at every location that has a BCT on it to determine how and how much we can take force structure down. Focus on Pacific is important. We have a lot of forces stationed in Korea, South Korea right now, in support of that. It's one of those things that we have to evaluate and we have to balance. They are very tough decisions that we're making right now. In the listening sessions that we've had, we've heard a lot from the communities, and that comes into play. Military value does come into play. Op plans come into play. We're taking a look at everything and trying to put together a tough decision to reduce the force to levels that we don't think is appropriate, whether it's 450,000 or even deeper to 420,000, where we'd be if full sequestration stays the way it is right now. So as I said, there are tough decisions that are going to affect almost every state because it's going to affect Guard and Reserve as well.
Thank you. I think it's important that we share this understanding and these impacts, not only on the local economies or the districts or the states that are affected by these sequester cuts, but really how it affects the mission, how it affects our readiness, and how in places like the Asia-Pacific, and particularly in the Korean Peninsula, where we continue to see the saber rattling coming from North Korea, these are not theoretical things. These are things that have a very real impact on real people and the safety and security of the American people. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gabbard. Dr. Winstrup.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a relatively quick question. Ms. Hammack, you were mentioning before about some of the places where redeveloped real estate, movie theater, this and that. Did we sell the real estate to private investors, or do we own it in the hopes of turning a profit? How does that work?
One of the rules that Congress put in play under BRAC is the ability for special transfer authority and working with a local reuse authority. So the community sets up a local reuse authority that has a say in how that property is developed. Some of the other authorities we have to close bases, and we do have other authorities to close bases. We essentially close the base and give the real estate to GSA to sell to the highest bidder. The community doesn't have a say in redevelopment. The redevelopment comes along with grants, structured payment plans. The land is transferred usually at or below market cost. In many cases, below market cost. There's some value that comes back to the Army or the Department of Defense, and quite often that value received is used for environmental cleanup. So that's what helps fund our environmental cleanup on bases. Some require more than others.
So there's several components to this before an action is taken, and several ways that you can go about it. Are there some areas that we are leasing, or are we basically turning these areas over just to kind of get out from under? And
Many cases, we're trying to find a buyer for it so that we can entirely get out of any caretaker or real estate responsibility. But meanwhile, to your point, the Army does have leases around, and we're working to move things back on bases into some of the empty real estate. But even so, we have more capacity than we have the need for right now. So BRAC is a way for us to do that kind of rebalance, consolidations, and evaluate where we need to be for the future.
Yeah, I think hearing some more of these situations, success stories, potential failures as we go forward is always good to hear about how we're managing that situation. So thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Wenstrup. Mr. Conger, I want to pursue a line of questioning that we had talked about earlier, and that is the context in which the concept of BRAC is proposed. Today, we find ourselves in a threat scenario that is probably more complex than it's been in any time in our history, one that changes almost on a daily basis. We're also facing budgeting issues through sequester. We're also looking at where our end strength ultimately ends up being. We also look at what is the national security strategy. What should it be? Should it be to fight and win a war on one front and hold serve elsewhere, to fight and win a war just on one front, to fight and win on two fronts? I think that's part of the discussion that has to take place. And in that realm of uncertainty, now comes the proposal to resize the capacity within the military. And one of the assumptions I think you have to have going forward in what the right capacity is some certainty about what the overall strategy for the nation is, what the security risks are, the issue of sequester, and where are we with certainty with the budgeting process, which I would argue we're not anywhere close yet. Hopefully we get there. And where we are with end strength. All of those, in my mind, have a very particular impact on the assumptions that you would put into doing a BRAC. Give me your perspective on how we go about doing a BRAC, right-sizing capacity in the face of all that uncertainty, and show me that when we end up there, if we were to go down that path, that we end up in the right place.
Sure. I think that the best way for me to answer that question is to talk a little bit about what we did in Europe, and then I'll bring it back to the specifics at hand. When we did the European infrastructure consolidation effort, which was a very BRAC-like process, we looked at excess capacity that we identified. We looked at the military value of the various sites and installations in Europe. And then we analyzed a variety of proposed scenarios, and it's very much like the way a BRAC would work. When we did that, we already incorporated the ability to have excess for contingencies, and that was made part of the requirement. That was not excess per se. We incorporated that into the analysis, and we made a conscious decision to only look at and only accept recommendations that did not reduce our operational capacity. So in other words, how can we do the same thing for less money? What we're looking for in the context of a BRAC round is how do we do the same thing for less money? If I understand the strategic uncertainty of what's our ultimate force level going to be, we rely on the Joint Staff to provide that input. The installations folks don't make it up. And historically, they've provided a 20-year force structure plan that's been required. But as you pointed out, there's uncertainty. In the sequestration BCA environment, is the Army going to be at 450 or 420? What procurement programs are or aren't going to go forward? Are we going to have A-10s or not A-10s? These are all things that factor into the calculus, and I understand that. But nonetheless, when you look at the BRAC analysis, it is based on retaining those places that have the highest military value, not those places that are not empty. And so the idea would be, well, what happens if you reduce force structure to a particular location, but that base has the best training ranges, or that base has the most maneuver acres, et cetera, et cetera. You don't close that base, you fill that base. And those are the dynamics that have to be contemplated within a BRAC. You are only looking at divesting those installations that are of the lowest military value.
As we look at this in context, obviously we're coming out of conflicts, Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, coming into a realm of a more dangerous world, coming into a time of reset. If there's one thing we've seen historically about reset is we always get it wrong. We have a hard time determining what the future may hold. But in that realm of uncertainty, do you believe that there should be a logical process to say, let's cross off a few of these other uncertainties on the list first before we get to the point of doing a BRAC? In other words, shouldn't there be a little more certainty about what truly is the strategy? What are we going to do to address the sequester in the long term? Where are we going to end up with end strength? What's going to happen with the world around us as far as the threat scenarios? Wouldn't it be logical in your mind to say, let's determine a little bit more certainty in those areas before we go about setting capacity, that if we don't get that right, we can't dial it up like a radio dial and say, whoops, sorry, we made a mistake. We'll just dial it back up, because it's hard to dial back up that capacity once it's lost.
I think it is. It all depends on how much you expect to cut. Mm-hmm. If I identified a parametric excess on the order of 20%, am I going to cut 20% of my infrastructure? No. During the BRAC 2005 round, we had identified parametrically in excess of approximately 24%. What we ended up cutting was 3.4% of our plant replacement value. And I know it's apples and oranges, it's two different metrics, but it's what we could measure. The idea is we are not going to pursue recommendations in the name of savings that accept so much risk that would be an issue. That's where we're coming from. We are looking for savings. We found it in the European analysis fairly straightforwardly. We were able to identify many recommendations without accepting what we deemed to be operational risk, and we were still able to retain significant enough excess to be able to deal with contingency operations. Mm-hmm. I think that where we're going with a BRAC isn't to give us BRAC authority so we can close all of our excess, because that would be foolish, mm-hmm. right? What we are looking to do is have the authority to find those business cases and those scenarios which make the most sense, that enable us to fully utilize our installations of highest military value, because we can't refill them right now because we are prevented from closing the places where we have the lower military value and filling those up. We have constraints on what we can do. I understand Congress's concern about the risk that we would accept, and I welcome ideas about how to constrain the authorities that Congress would provide so that you feel more comfortable with the authority you're giving.
If Congress were to consider the idea of directing the service branches to do an analysis based on a certain set of conditions or reality, would that be something that you could bring back to Congress within the year to give more context and more definition to what a BRAC might entail, including all these uncertainties, including what the end means are for a BRAC and what the ends might be? In other words, is it to save money? And if it is, how much is saved in the fit-up? Obviously not identifying bases, but looking across those general categories.
So I think that it's important to recognize that when you, we could do a parametric capacity analysis like the Army.
I just want to interrupt you. If you will, put in context, tell us what a parametric analysis is.
So if you are looking at excess capacity, you're looking at aircraft per apron space or brigade combat teams per training acre aggregated across the entire enterprise. You're not looking at Camp Swampy, how much excess do I have in that particular location? You are adding it all up and developing a percentage based on what might have been the loading at a different period of time. How much have we vacated? That's the kind of analysis we do in order to avoid any sort of bias in the analysis that would point to a particular installation. We're very careful about that. We believe that any time you do a comprehensive BRAC analysis based on certified data where all bases are treated equally, that can't be influenced by a proposed list. I already know I want to do this, or I already know I want to do that. We don't want to pollute the process that we see as transparent, analytical, and apolitical by influencing it with sort of a here's where we're going type of thing.
Let me end with this, and I want to go to Ms. Bordallo. Would you believe it to be helpful to be able to answer some of the questions that I think you hear from the subcommittee members today, and also other questions that are out there, to be able to pursue such an analysis where you can look at those parameters, do that analysis, put some scenarios in there where members can at least understand how you address the uncertainties that are around a BRAC, so that they have a better sense, as you heard from Mr. Scott, a better level of trust in that those issues that they feel are important with this are addressed in that, and that they have some level of surety that if Congress were to go down the road of a BRAC, that there's some context in which they've made the decision, rather than what happened in 2005, which was let's do a BRAC and then do the analysis. It was kind of the cart coming before the horse.
Right. I think that it's fair to request an excess capacity analysis across the government. I think the Army and the Air Force have already done ones, but I think we can do one that is comprehensive, and we've been contemplating that ever since the language you inserted into the HASC bill last year.
Yeah.
The specifics of how we would do that, I think, are fair to discuss, but I think that we think it's important to do. We wouldn't be able to do base-by-base types of things in this context without a formal BRAC process.
Well, we wouldn't expect that, because I think that's what the BRAC is intended for, is to do a base-by-base comparison. But to look overall, as you said, within the parameters, and then address those different uncertainties that are out there, to say this is how we factor in to provide for if this uncertainty were to happen within this range, the worst case scenario to the best case scenario, here's how we have factored in what this would be, and here's how a BRAC could and would address that. I think those issues are very important in people's minds.
Let me sort of plant this seed as well. What that parametric analysis does, what the excess analyses that the Army and the Air Force have done, is that they point to excess where it creates the trade space in which you can make some specific decisions.
Right.
In EIC, we did the same sort of thing. We said, we see there's force structure reducing in Europe. We know that there's trade space here. Let's go in and look at the specifics. And the specifics didn't necessarily have to do with the specific places where there was excess created, right. but we knew that there was the room to move around in that space. The specific places where we might identify excess won't end up necessarily being where the recommendations are, but they provide the trade space, the swing space that might afford an opportunity. Sure. Let me leave you with a thought. In EIC, and I'll use an Air Force example, we have enough fighters in Europe to basically completely fill two fighter bases. But we have 3 fighter bases in Europe. But those were among the highest military value installations that we have on the continent. So instead, what we contemplated and what we ended up recommending was taking a facility that had a support function, Mildenhall, and taking the assets there and filling up the fighter bases so that it had, so that Spangdahlem in particular had multi-mission. We were able to preserve the bases we deemed to be the highest military value, and so what we were proposed wasn't necessarily where the excess was. Does that make sense? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add,
Sure.
especially in this committee or this subcommittee, you hear the expression "train like you fight." That is right at the essence of achieving readiness. And we all, across all of the services and across the department, work encroachment issues all the time, whether it's jet noise or operations at sea, ground combat maneuvering, et cetera. And I just wanted to make the comment that this is a key aspect of military value that Mr. Conger was talking about, and it isn't based on necessarily only a future BRAC issue or to not have one. It is happening right today, every installation, and preserving that ability to train like you fight directly contributes to our readiness.
Mr. McGinn, I think that's a great point. It's one of the questions that comes up too all the time with the BRAC, and that is if you get to a point of releasing facilities that, again, you may need in some capacity in the future, to be able to reconstitute that becomes impossible to go back to those existing bases, because then encroachment occurs. So then it becomes very difficult to train like you fight. And then you have to go to different areas where the costs are increased, either to obtain the land or to pursue operations there. And you heard Mr. Gibson bring up a very good point, and that is the strategic location, too, of those facilities, which also has to be part of an analysis. It's one of those areas that I think doesn't normally come up at the beginning of an analysis, but it has to be part of that so we understand what the secondary effects of that might be. With that, I'll go to Ms. Bordaglia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you. I think this has been very important, and we've received a lot of information from this hearing. I'm curious, Ms. Hammock and Mr. McGinn and Miss Ballantine, if you could comment briefly, how are you leveraging privatization efforts, public-private partnerships, or other innovative authorities to mitigate the risk in infrastructure investments and achieve financial savings? May we start with you, Mr. McGinn?
We use all of the tools that Congress has given us, the authorizations, enhanced use leases, energy savings performance contracts, utility energy services contracts, power purchase agreements, to be able to get private sector investment in our installations that do a couple of things. They give us better, cleaner power. They get us more reliable power to the extent that we get distributed generation. And it's really good for the economy of not just the local area, but the nation, and putting this capital to work. At the same time, we in the services get the immediate benefits from seeing these deals occur, these contracts occur over a very compressed period of time, measured in months, not years. And as soon as those projects are completed, we are reaping the benefits in lower utility bills, in better, cleaner, cheaper energy, and a more robust backbone for distributed generation.
Very good. Ms. Hammock?
Thank you, Representative Bordaglia. You know, we've been leveraging partners for quite a while. Housing is one of our most successful ones, where we've privatized housing to deliver better housing for our service members. Most of our bases have lodging for visitors and for soldiers who are PCSing or for training missions. And we've privatized lodging, which has increased the quality of the lodging that we provide service members. We've also worked to privatize utilities, whether it's electricity, natural gas, or wastewater. And the private sector comes in and invests in the infrastructure, which actually then makes it much more efficient and then reduces our operating costs. So we found that utilities privatization helps save us cost in the long run. And now we're looking at a fourth category, which is how do we privatize some of our base operations? And quite often we call it the Monterey model, because Presidio of Monterey, located in Monterey, California, is entirely surrounded by the city of Monterey. And what we have done is privatize all of our base operations facilities, so the city of Monterey runs the Presidio of Monterey, and it's resulted in reduced operating costs. We look to see where we can apply some or parts of the Monterey model through legislation that Congress authorized just last year. They clarified it. And some of our installations, many of our installations, are located in remote locations, not in locations where a city or a county is available to provide services, but we're investigating where there are opportunities to leverage core competencies that might be outside the base so that we're not duplicating services on the base.
Thank you. And Ms. Ballantine.
So the Air Force, like our sister services, looks at a number of other opportunities and tools in the toolkit. As I said at the beginning, when you have unaffordable installations, it's really simple. There's only two ways you can get after it. You can spend more money on them, or you can make them cost less. And one of the things that really excites me is beyond just MILCON and FSRM and BRAC, we have a range of other tools in our toolkit. So of course, privatization of housing has been very successful. We're also working down the path of privatizing utilities. But there are a range of other tools as well, and I'll give you a couple of examples. Enhanced use leases is an exciting area of opportunity. Most folks have heard about the wastewater treatment plant down at Nellis, and in return they built a state-of-the-art fitness center. We've got another really exciting enhanced use lease down at Eglin Air Force Base, where the Holiday Inn has built a hotel, and we've put our radar on top. Our radar tower was on the ground and less effective because the other hotels were building up next to it. So we needed to build the radar tower anyway. Not only have they put the radar on the top, they've painted it like a beach ball. So this thing has become kind of a landmark, and it's really a neat story. And the Holiday Inn then pays us a percentage of their gross revenues. So this thing has become kind of a landmark, and it's really a neat story. And the Holiday Inn then pays us a percentage of their gross revenues every year.
Excellent.
It's a great opportunity. So those are a couple of EULs. Power purchase agreements allow us to get cleaner energy on our bases, provide some energy resiliency. We just did our largest solar array in the Air Force to date, 6.4 megawatts at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. That thing is providing 35% of the base's power. At peak sun, it's providing over 100% of the base's power, and it's saving them $500,000 a year. That's another tool that helps get at the fact that these bases cost too much money and gets at the energy resiliency. And there are a number of other examples like that. So this is one of the areas that I'm really excited about and keeps me optimistic.
Well, thank you. We see these at home. We have a large Air Force base and Navy base, and I see these partnerships ongoing. And I think it brings the military and civilian community together in a big way, and I think that's important. I have one last question, Mr. Chairman. Okay. Ms. Ballantine, in recent years, a large percentage of the Air Force's military construction budget has been focused on supporting combatant commander requirements, such as the headquarters facility for U.S. Strategic Command and the U.S. Cyber Command, and new mission bed downs, such as the KC-46 and the F-35. Now, can you describe the impact these requirements have had on the Air Force's ability to focus on the recapitalization of infrastructure supporting current missions?
Yes, ma'am. So General Welsh, our Chief of Staff, has said quite clearly that we have in the last several years been underfunding our existing mission infrastructure, things like nuclear infrastructure, space infrastructure, test and training ranges, and those bills are now due. This year's PB16 MILCON budget, I think, is really strikes the right balance between three priorities. First, continuing to focus on COCOM commanders' needs. That's around 21% of this year's MILCON budget. Second, focusing on the Secretary's three top priorities, nuclear, space, cyber. Those combined are about 17%, and much of that is what might fall in that category of existing mission recapitalization. We've got three very important nuclear recapitalization infrastructure projects in that bucket. And then the third pillar of the MILCON strategy is really balancing that existing mission infrastructure recap with bed down of the new weapons systems. And those two are about 26% for existing mission recapitalization, things like firehouses and runways and the like, and 16% for F-35 and KC-46 bed down.
Thank you very much, and Mr. Chairman, thank you for giving me the second round of questions.
Absolutely, Ms. Bordallo, thank you. I have one housekeeping item. I ask unanimous consent to include into the record all member statements and extraneous material. Without objection, so ordered. Panelists, thank you so much today for joining us, and we appreciate the time you've spent with us. Obviously, all of our members got to ask questions, all of, I think, significance as we look about how we address a variety of challenges, obviously one of them being installation capacity in the context of what happens with sequester, end strength, and national security strategy. So thank you all so much for providing that perspective to us today, and we will continue the dialogue as we head forward into the National Defense Authorization Act. Thank you so much, and with that, subcommittee is adjourned.